The salary cap projections are in, and boy, does it bode well for the Buds. We'll get into the latest breaking news there and tee up this weekend showdown against McDavid and the Oilers. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leafs-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. I feel like my voice is getting worse as the days go on. Not better, Dave. The voice just continues to kind of cradle itself. I don't know what's going on. We'll power through today, buddy.
You start, like, when we started talking as we got on the like on our background here, like, you were sounding good, and it's kind of plateauing right now. It's kind of what I went
through. And then I had a cough, and I don't know what that cough did, but it strained the cords again. We're gonna power through because there's a lot to get to on today's show. We had a lot of news in the last 24 hours, both league related, Leafs related. We got some salary cap projections, which have a big impact on what the future of the Maple Leafs could look like. We had a trade go down in the NHL last night. The captains were announced for the Four Nations face-off. And you got the Maple Leafs hitting the road for a final 4-game road trip before wrapping things up ahead of the Four Nations tournament. So there is a lot to get into on today's show. So why don't we start with what's kind of the latest breaking news right before we got on. All the insiders now projecting, announcing that the salary cap for the next 3 years is expected to take quite the quantum leap, a lot larger than we've been accustomed to seeing over the course of the last few seasons. I mean, obviously, through the pandemic, there was the flat cap, and then it went up a measly $1 million that one year, and then it went up, $4 or $5 million this year, sitting at $88 million. Next season, according to Elliot Friedman, the cap is projected to rise to $95.5 million. We're looking at a $7.5 million increase in cap next year, and then 2 years from now, expected to increase to $104 million, crossing the century mark for the first time in history, and then expected to rise even further 3 years from now to $113.5 million, a $9.5 million increase from the season prior. So in the next 3 years, we could see the cap go from 88 to $113.5 million. That's music to the ears to a lot of cap strapped teams, and ain't no one been more cap strapped over the years than the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, like, you're trying to figure out how the heck does a team afford all these expensive players? Well, you get a little bit of help from the salary cap. It looks like. I mean, that's the big one here is you got teams who, I mean, if you're the Colorado Avalanche have to have known that this was coming when it comes to the salary cap increase. Maybe do they wonder if they moved a little too quickly on the Rantanen one? Who knows? But, like, if you're a free agent right now, you're playing that Shane McMahon WWE theme song right now, the money right now.
Money. Well, you mean like Mitch Marner and John Tavares and maybe a Matthew Nyes? A few players who obviously the Maple Leafs need to get under contract heading into next year, and I think it's good for both the team, obviously, but it's obviously great for the players that there's an extra $8 million of cap space available. And I mean, like, how much do you think this changes the negotiations for those guys, for Marner, for Tavares, for Matthew Nyes?
Part of me thinks it's like agents have an idea of projections. Teams have an idea on projections, right? I guess it certainly does now that there's a more concrete number, more concrete estimate that, okay, like now we can actually get to the brass tacks of things. Like I do have coming. It was going to be for today, but I think we're going to push it to next week. I do have a story on kind of Mitch Marner's contract projections, and one of the things, I'll give you a little preview. One of the things I talked about was you needed to know where the salary cap was going to be, because initially it was supposed to be $92.5 million. Then we heard from Alan Walsh it could go somewhere up to $97 million, and now we're at $95.5 million. Like those again, yeah. It might not seem like those increases, they're significant increases, but just that extra little, that $3 million bump means a whole lot more, especially when you think about how contracts now are looked at. It's not just the AAV, it's what percentage of that AAV goes towards the cap.
Right. And when you look at the big deals nowadays, that seems to be how a lot of these contracts are actually doled out. It's percentage of the cap, right? Matthews, he got 13% of the cap or whatever it was, 12.5% of the cap, whereas McDavid ended up with 13% of the cap. And that's basically how these contracts are being done. And this is how we keep seeing, the market get reset year after year. And now with it being so high, you look at percentage of the cap, the next time someone needs to go and sign a contract at 13%, I mean, well, let's even say it's at 12%. Like it's going to come in under where Matthews came in at 95.5, times 12%. We're looking at what at this point times 0.12, $11.46 million. Like for a 12% of that cap is over $11 million, nearly $11.5 million. You look at 12% of a cap. So that's quite large. So yeah, it definitely changes things for the Maple Leafs, for, Marner and Matthews negotiations. And it's funny you brought up the Rantanen thing, because that was one of the first things I thought of too, was if this news came out a week ago, does Colorado still make that deal, knowing that they'll have a few extra million to play with that they could have tossed Rantanen's way? Or were they already stuck in their way where they knew the number they wanted and figured Rantanen wasn't going to get there, despite, regardless, whatever the cap is, they knew they wanted to be under a certain number and they weren't willing to do the percentage of cap negotiation? That's possible. That's possible that was part of the problem. But I do find it kind of funny now that like the cap has risen an additional $3 million than what the original projection is, that both of us right away thought, oh, I wonder if Colorado would take a mulligan on that deal to keep Rantanen, knowing they got a little extra cash to play with, little extra wiggle room. Speaking of deals and wiggle room, also in the NHL last night, had a big time trade go down that had a lot of cap space involved in the deal. A lot of cap going both ways, I guess we could say. The Philadelphia Flyers dealing Joel Farabee and Morgan Frost to the Calgary Flames for Jacob Pelletier and Andrei Kuzmenko draft picks going to Philadelphia's way as well in the deal. What did you make of this trade? I thought it was a little strange.
I was like, man, Philly is just like, they're going, I wouldn't say scorched earth, but they are truly committing to, turning things over. Sometimes you think, oh, you have a little bit of, the season hasn't gone terribly for them, but it hasn't been great. So I think this is just them saying we're committed to kind of turning things over. But I'm just also like, Morgan Frost, the Leafs couldn't have tried to get in on a Morgan Frost deal. Like, they didn't exactly land great assets in return. Like they did, yeah. They got a second round pick, a couple of picks. Like Kuzmenko has struggled. I don't even know how he's going to be like under Torts. Pelletier is a draft pick that hasn't landed right in the NHL. So it's almost like for Philly, you basically were just clearing out these players and just kind of turning over a new leaf in a way.
Yeah, it's what it feels like just kind of cap dumps on both sides. It was a strange deal. I guess the Flyers are hoping that like Kuzmenko can maybe help with Michkov, help bridge the gap there with, the Russian factor. And did they play together? And I thought I saw someone say they played together with KSA, didn't they? I thought possibly they did, or Siska, or whatever the hell it is, Ska, St. Petersburg. They might have played together. So it could be a reunion for those two, potentially. Or if not, just using the Russian factor to try and help, have a good veteran around for Matvei Michkov. I guess that could be part of it, but might be like Kuzmenko's kind of final straw here. Like, it's now his third team. He's really struggled since an unbelievable rookie season. He's making a lot of money. No salary was retained here. So this was a pure salary cap dump for the Calgary Flames. And they got some good pieces. Like, it makes sense, I guess, from Calgary. They get Joel Farabee, who's a pretty good piece. He could score goals. And Morgan Frost, good depth piece. So they add two players who they believe they can add into their lineup. And surprisingly, they are in a playoff push. So it's a deal that works, I think, better for Calgary. But yeah, I don't know, it's just kind of that's the best the Flyers could have got for Farabee and Frost. That's kind of where my head went when I saw that trade go down. But it must have been, right? Teams aren't in the business of making bad deals. So it must have been, one of the better offers out there. Maybe they have belief that Peltier can turn into, the two-way middle six winger that he was drafted to be. Remember, he was a pretty good player for Canada at the World Juniors that one year. I think, they're praying and hoping that he can turn into that for the Flyers down the road and picking up some picks along the way. I think Kuzmenko deal also is up at the end of the season, whereas Farabee and Frost, I know Farabee at least, I believe, had some term left on the deal. So they're getting rid of some future cap space as well, maybe to, weaponize it at some point to either get other players picks or in free agency dip into it. So I guess you can find reasoning for the deals on both sides, but it kind of caught me off guard, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, I thought for a second there, like, this when I saw Frost's name, like, you see Frost's name, you're just like, okay, I can kind of see he's been kind of out on the outs. When I saw Farabee's name, I'm just like, whoa. Like, man, Philly is just really going for it. So, like, good on Calgary for jumping on it. It's, for them, they didn't really give up much other than, like, the second round pick. Like, if you look at all the things that they got rid of, I think it was a worthwhile deal for them, considering it's not a big push. It's going to give them a bit of a bump. Let's see how much of a bump it gives them, and they didn't really have to give up much to do it.
Are the Maple Leafs looking to add to their depth? We'll talk about that possibility next here on the Locked On Leafs podcast. Today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Attending NFL playoff games is an unforgettable experience that brings fans together. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to your events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, I know people who've used the Gametime app to find their tickets. They've been browsing through the deals, and it's simple. They're finding great value for all kinds of seats around the venue. The super deals are especially impressive, offering the best value for events. The app's features like seat views before you buy, the all-in pricing with no surprise fees at checkout, make the experience smooth and reliable. Plus, the on-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee give you that peace of mind. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. The Locked On Leafs podcast continues. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you as we are each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. You can find us free and available wherever you get your podcasts for you on-the-go listeners. And you can also watch us live on YouTube. Well, not live, I guess, but on YouTube each and every day on the Locked On Leafs YouTube channel. Lots of Leafs news as well, percolating around the world. A couple of Maple Leafs were named to the I guess the captain and an alternate were named to the leadership group of a couple of teams at the Four Nations tournament. No surprise, Austin Matthews gets the C for Team USA, and William Nylander ends up with the assistant captaincy on Team Sweden. What'd you make of that news?
Not surprised. Matt, like when you're looking at especially Team USA, yeah, there are some good options, but Matthews is the top American player, going into this tournament, right? And so, there was talks about it too that he was going to get named when Bill Guerin was in town with the Wild, and they were going to have that chat. Nylander, that's surprising. I will say, because you don't ever I don't think I've ever seen Nylander wear a letter.
The thing is, he always goes and plays the World Championships. Like he has been a soldier for the Swedish national team.
Yep.
So I mean, like, it doesn't surprise me. And the way he's elevated his game over the last 2 years and into this season, I'm not overly shocked by it, to be honest with you. He's one of the best players on the team. Like it makes sense, Victor Hedman, to get the captaincy, obviously, but then pretty much next on the list would be William Nylander for me. So, we've never seen him in a leadership role, but when it comes to being, a great teammate and a great ambassador for the Swedish team and the Swedish game, Nylander's always willing to go and play for his country. And I'm sure it's him getting rewarded for that.
Yeah, no, essentially it's for a lot of ways. It's not just what he's done this season. It's also what he's done with Sweden. So yeah, we've always seen him play so well at the World Championships. It's almost like it would be kind of weird if he didn't get a letter, right? Like, just based on, we knew Victor Hedman was going to be the captain. That was like the biggest no-brainer of them all. So like when you look at the players that are still, up for a letter, there was some competition there for Nylander, but it definitely makes sense. He is going to be, I mean, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think he's going to be the top forward for them going into this tournament.
Probably. Yeah. I mean, I think off the top of my head, I'd have to, really remember and look at the roster, but I would think so. I would definitely think so. Some other Leaf news, according to a couple of insiders. I know Nick Kyprios was pretty heavy on this news earlier today, and I know Frank Saravalli has been reporting it as well. But it sounds like the Maple Leafs are, in fact, kicking tires on Brandon Saad after he became a free agent after deciding to terminate his contract with the St. Louis Blues, giving up quite a bit of money, gave up $5 million. He had a whole other year on his deal, and there was about $5 million left on the contract, and he decided, no, I want to play. I don't want to go into the AHL, and I'm willing to give up money to stay in the NHL. So Brandon Saad is apparently, the Leafs are interested. And I think that they should be. I think he'd be a good fit here for Toronto as a nice little bottom six forward addition who's got some defensive responsibilities. He brings a winning pedigree. Craig Berube knows him. They played together, or he played for him when they were in St. Louis for a year. I do believe that this would be a pretty good signing. I don't think it would be, expensive, probably looking at a low cost, 1 year veteran minimum for the rest of the season. I think this would be a great signing if Toronto can get this done.
Yeah, I like initially I was thinking about it and I'm just like, yeah, no, I don't know why people would not want Brandon Saad on this team, considering how the last few weeks have gone and just the lack of scoring that they have low in the lineup. He scored 26 goals last year.
Yeah.
Like, he's a year away from scoring off of scoring 26. He's won 2 cups. As you said, Berube knows him. And I would rather throw him out and hope that he's going to get this team's offense going than a guy like Pontus Holmberg or even Nick Robertson. Like, these guys they're just not producing enough. And I think if you're the Leafs, you could really sell Brandon Saad on 2 things. 1, familiarity with the coach that you've had success with. And 2, you're probably going to get a normal playing time in Toronto that if you look at the other teams that he is rumored to go to, he might have to battle for playing a little more playing time there than I think he would in Toronto.
Yeah, the other teams reportedly in on the Brandon Saad sweepstakes, the Edmonton Oilers, who the Leafs play this weekend, the Vegas Golden Knights, and Sheldon Keefe's New Jersey Devils, apparently interested in Brandon Saad's services. So I think I saw Kipper said that a decision could be made as early as today. So just some news to keep an eye on out there if you're interested. Brandon Saad potentially could become a Toronto Maple Leaf. Really quickly before we take another break and dive into the Leafs upcoming road trip with the Oilers, upcoming for the Western Canadian road trip. TSN put out a top 25 list today, top 25 players so far in the 24-25 season. 3 Maple Leafs were named to the list. I'm sure you could go 3 for 3 naming them. Did you have a chance to take a look at the list, Dave?
I didn't see the list. I know who's on the list. I heard some of the debates about who's on the list.
I want you then to tell me in which order you think those 3 gentlemen are on the list.
I'm probably going to put Mitch Marner first. If we're looking at, because I know the debate was how their seasons have gone so far. So I do think that he's probably up at the top. And then I probably have Willie, then Matthews.
So that is the correct order in which they are on the TSN top 25 list. So Mitch Marner, according to the list, has been the 9th best player in the league to this point in the year. So a top 10 player, which you can make that argument for a while there. Mitch Marner, it was kind of when Matthews was out, funny enough, was rattling off, multi-point games left, right, and center. Like he was unbelievable for a good stretch of 3 weeks there. So he came in at number 9. Nylander comes in at number 20 for TSN's list. And then Matthews just making it at number 23. So apparently he's been the 23rd best player. And I wonder how, I know Brian Hayes came out and said, Brian Hayes of Overdrive came out and said he left him off the list. He didn't believe he's been part of the top 25. And it's mainly due to the injury, right? The injury that he hasn't played enough games. And when he did play, he looked like he was not himself. So take away the last 11 games where he has scored 9 goals. The games prior to that, when he came back, he didn't look himself. And then there was a couple weeks there prior to going down with the original injury. He also didn't really look himself. So, I think that it probably makes sense. Marner, Nylander, Matthews, but we'll see how the list finishes at the end of the year. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll get to the upcoming Leafs road trip, and we'll preview tomorrow's game against the Edmonton Oilers. That's next here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you here on the Locked On Leafs podcast. The Maple Leafs, finishing up not a great homestand here. It hasn't been great at home, but they hit the road for the final 4 games before the Four Nations face-off. It all starts tomorrow night in Edmonton. Then they'll be in Calgary, Seattle, and Vancouver to end it off on February 8th. The Leafs kind of need this trip. I think they want to get away from home for a little bit. It's been quite loud here for how poorly that they've played. But they are getting healthier. So there's the positive to look at heading into this weekend. Could potentially see both Tavares and Nyes return in the game Saturday against the Edmonton Oilers. And maybe even Anthony Stolarz could get back at some point on this road trip.
Yeah, I think Craig Berube kind of said it right. Get on the road, guys get to be together. And I mean, it's if you're the Leafs, you get fewer media on the road too, so it's almost like it gives you a bit of a breather from everything that's going on. They've also just played better on the road lately. Like offensively, they've produced better on their minus the game in Ottawa, But I'm also hoping that it's more than just getting away from Toronto that's going to help. But I'm hoping the reinforcements that are hopefully coming along with them.
Yeah. Let's pray. Let us pray. Let us pray. Because the Leafs need some goals. They need some goals desperately, and especially going into a matchup tomorrow night against the Edmonton Oilers, where TSN's number one player, Leon Draisaitl, resides, along with just the number one player in the world, Connor McDavid, the number one heartthrob of Toronto, Zach Hyman. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, obviously. So yeah, I definitely, it would be a welcomed addition to get these guys back. It called me crazy though, as we kind of start to look ahead to tomorrow. Why do I have a little bit of confidence in this team bouncing back? Am I insane, Dave?
Always.
Am I insane?
Always. I mean, it's what we've come to expect from this team, that when we don't expect the team to play well against, especially a higher echelon, like their first game is against the Oilers. Many people would probably say the Oilers are going to feed the Leafs their lunch. But as we have seen with this team many times in the past, when the competition gets a little more elevated, they play better, right? So I do suspect that you're going to see a better effort from the Leafs going into this road trip. And yeah, I mean, I think you also look at it as the coaching staff's like, we got 3 games left here before, 4 games. 4 games left here before the 4 Nations break. The last thing you want is for this 2-week period to be about this team struggling going into that break.
That is a very good point. It'll be a long 2 weeks if this team goes 1-3 on the road trip and, is like a -8 goal differential, and they continue to only put up 1 or 2 goals a game. They do need to kind of reverse the trend, and they need to have a positive storyline these final 4 games in order for that 2-week stretch during the 4 Nations face-off not to be loud. And it'll just be a completely different conversation, right? The next 2 weeks, what we talk about, or 2 weeks from now, what we talk about will be dictated by the following week. Like that's 100% going to be the case. It's going to decide whether or not this team is going to go big buck hunting to try and fix the holes that are in this team for Stanley Cup contention, to put themselves in that route, or is it going to show that team doesn't have it? Probably just a couple thinkers, some little things. Don't waste big assets because this team ain't got it. They might have to do some other things. It really is going to kind of come down to these next few games, which is going to be interesting. But yeah, for some reason, I've got a little bit of confidence, because whenever this team, like you said, whenever they think that they're going to lose and their back's up against the wall, it's usually when they decide to pull out the knife and fight. So we'll see if that happens tomorrow night in Edmonton and beyond. All right. Unless there's anything else that you wanted to bring up, I think that might be it for us here.
No, it's gonna be a fun week. I think, like, we look at the trades that happen. There's a reason why these trades are happening now, right? This is almost like a mini NHL trade deadline. So
for sure, and it sounds like some teams want to get some stuff done before the 4 Nations face off. So there could be, another week of flurry, a flurry of trades. And what I will say is, you see a couple of trades here that have gone down of late. There's been a lot of cap dumps and a lot of big salaries that have been able to move. If Toronto wants to get into the market, I can think of a decent size salary, about a mid-size salary that has been very underwhelming this year, that I would be more than fine taking a cap dump on if the Leafs could get out of that contract and open up a bit more space. Could you imagine who I'm referring to? Do you think you know?
Are you talking about Morgan Riley?
No, I'm not actually.
Oh,
The
talking
other
about Ryan
one.
Reeves?
No, Max Domi.
Oh, Domi. Yeah, he's another one that I'm sure a lot of people would. Yeah, considering what he's being paid and what he's producing, I could definitely see that. That's just, I don't know,
Especially if they had a Brandon Saad. right? Like if they had a Saad, like I don't know, that makes it a lot more difficult for them to have to keep a guy like Max Domi. But anyways, maybe that's conversation for next week or the 2-week break where we'll have a lot to get into. So we'll save those conversations for next week at the very least. That'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You could subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys on Monday. Enjoy the game tomorrow night. Should be a goodie. Always is. Matthews versus McDavid. Leafs, Oilers, Saturday night. It's in Edmonton, but it's a 7 o'clock start. Suck it to everyone out there on the Pacific Coast. We'll catch you guys on Monday. Until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.